What's up, people? It's another beautiful day outside and here we are playing video games. I'm Kojomain and today I'm showcasing a deck for Afanas and Senka of the Izmir. I was at one of the Altered Roadshows last week and I got the Afanas promo card, which was awesome because this is a hero I'm really looking forward to, and now I'm even more hyped to finally make a video about him. It's honestly crazy how many different playstyles you can play with Izmir, even just in the first set. You can go with Akesha and try to play some traditional control, but you can also pick Lindiwe and play something completely different that we MTG folks like to call aristocrats, which means a deck built around sacrificing. And the third Izmir hero is yet again a completely different playstyle. With Afanas and Senka you get rewarded for each spell you cast by getting to pump up your characters. So this deck tries to hit a delicate balance between characters and non-characters. We're trying to anchor our guys so that we get benefits from these boosts over multiple turns. So meditation training coming over from Muna as an out-of-faction rare is one of our key cards. It triggers Afanas and simultaneously anchors the character we've boosted for double benefits. What are the characters we'll be anchoring, you ask? Well, we've got some absolute bangers. Kadigaran mage-dancer is the natural fit for this deck. It has Afanas' own ability another time, so this card can grow basically by 2 power for each spell you cast. And we've got Bravo's blade-dancer, which is perfect to put boosts on because of its seasoned ability. Incidentally, both of these characters have dancer in their name, so that's where the name of the deck comes from. But we've also got Sneezershroom, which is another really nice fit for our game plan, and some other Izmir all-stars. But also Flamel, a really interesting card that I'm hyped to try out and see if he's worth the 4 mana. One thing you might have noticed is that I'm playing mage-dancer as a common, not a rare. That probably comes as a bit of a surprise. If you want my thoughts on it, check out the wrap-up at the end of the video where I talk about the whole deck list. You can also find the list as a link in the description. That's all for introductions, let's jump into the games. Alright, we are looking at game 1 here, and our opponent for this round is Sierra, the Axiom deck built around permanence. It's kind of sad to see that Sierra has been pushed out of the spotlight a bit by the fact that the other 2 Axiom heroes are so strong, but it still remains true that Sierra with her Brassbug Hive on the board is a real menace, so you should not underestimate that deck. Looks like we've got a really nice hand to work with here. It's an even split across all sorts of cards, so I'm thinking our character for turn 1 could either be Blade Dancer with spells to follow it up, or just slam Baba Yaga and hope for the best. Seeing as we're on the play against Sierra though, I went with the Blade Dancer because us slamming Baba Yaga is very likely to be met with her just playing one of her permanents, getting the Brassbug 2/2/2 and using that to counter our Baba Yaga and get a progression, which seems like an unnecessarily silly way to lose the first round. Keeping the Off You Go to remove the Brassbug is another option here, but I ended up going with meditation training, even though that only ties with the bug. So I play out the Blade Dancer and surprisingly, it looks like Sarah didn't have a turn 1 permanent in her starting hand, which is a good sign for us. She just plays an Amelia to trade sides, which is fair. I finish up the turn with the meditation training as planned and our Blade Dancer gets the boost from Afanas, so it goes up to 2/2/2. We trade progressions and overall I think we're off to a very decent start here in the first game. Our draw for round 2 is 2 Spycrafts, and that's pretty silly, especially since we're not on the play. We don't really have any options here except putting one of these into the mana and seeing how the round goes. Luckily, our opponent opts for playing a Haven Bouncer instead of the Amelia. I mean, it's not great for us to lose the meditation training, but at least now we get a chance to use the Spycraft and get anything for it. It looks like we'll be trading expeditions again, but maybe the resupply from Spycraft can turn things around. It's another Blade Dancer. Sadly, that's not enough to tie the Haven Bouncer. Sierra passes, and so do I. I could play Magical Training here to use the remaining mana, but there's no point. For round 3, we draw another Training and a Kadigaran mage-dancer. That looks like a good character to play at first, but given the fact that we already have 2 Blade Dancers in our reserve, I'd rather keep the Magical Trainings instead. So I lead with a Dancer that's already buffed, in case our opponent was planning to sabotage that. It's a 4/4/4 now, so theoretically our opponent could play the Haven Bouncer to tie it, but then we can still go over the top since our draw spells also put boosts on our characters via Afanas. The Sierra player is probably seeing that coming, so they opt to play an Axiom Reprocessor instead, getting the Brassbug from Sierra's hero power to try and trade expeditions again. And also resupplying her signature card, Brassbug Hive, which she will be able to cast next round. So at this point, I'm mentally kicking myself for not keeping the Spycrafts from earlier. I play out the second Blade Dancer. It comes into play as a 1/1/1, but with 1 mana still open, we can buff it up to tie with the bug still. Sierra passes, so I play one of the trainings and draw into Sneezershroom. wrong. Overall, the round's a win for us. So now we're ahead, but with the Brassbuck Hive already on the horizon, it's still unclear who's eventually going to come out on top. Round 4, I've drawn another dancer and our one-off Small Step Giant Leap. I really like this card and I was thinking about holding on to it here for later, but when it comes down to it, we haven't won the game just yet, and I think we need to keep our foot on the gas here, so I ended up keeping the other 3 cards. Naturally, our Sierra opponent took the opportunity to slam their Hive right away. It taps them out for the turn, but the risk of me sabotaging that was too big, and besides, putting 3 power on the board in each region on both sides is not exactly a turn of doing nothing either. It would have been an interesting idea to put both bucks on the same side here, but I guess that would still make it very easy for me to trade expeditions with minimal effort. Still, we have the entire rest of the round for ourselves, so we can make a lot of nice plays here. First of all, I play out the Sneezer Shroom and Sierra just passes naturally. Now we basically have 2 lines, playing 2 magical trainings, which would draw 2 cards and push our Shroom to 3 power. So that means we tie that side and only concede 1 expedition to Sierra this round. The alternative is playing mage-dancer and one of the trainings. That line is more resource intensive since the dancer will go to reserve without us having had a chance to anchor it, but it brings us up to 4 power, so we actually end up winning that side. And besides, mage-dancer only costs 1 from reserve, so it's not that bad. That's what I end up doing, and we draw an Off You Go. That's a very useful card against buffed up Brassbuck, so I'm happy with seeing it here. So all in all, that's another round of trading evenly. Now it's 4-3 in our favor, but that was just the turn where Sierra slammed Hive and did nothing else. So the real struggle is starting now. Sneezer Shroom and Flamel are our draws this round. I'm happy to see Flamel here, but we don't really have any spells in our reserve right now. Granted, he does pair up really well with Off You Go since it's so expensive from reserve, so I could definitely see getting rid of the Shroom here and keeping Flamel, but I was really worried about getting overrun by bugs, so I felt like I needed to play more smaller things. Looking back on it now, I would have probably kept the Flamel, since with his 4-3-3 stats, he also matches up really well against the 3-3-3 bugs. In the game, I led with mage-dancer, and Sierra put down her Haven Bouncer 4-4-4 to counter there. Keep in mind that while the hero expedition may look like a draw, we always have the option to turn that into a win by playing 1 spell and putting the Afanas boost on our Shroom there. So I tried to pull our opponent's attention away from there by playing out a second Shroom on the companion expedition, signaling that I wanted to contest the Haven Bouncer there. She adds her Foundry mechanic from reserve as her next play, which leaves her with 3 mana open and 4-5-5 in that expedition currently. It seems like she's aiming for me to cast 1 more spell, which would push me to 4-4-4. Now, we have 2 spells left, so we have the means to win both expeditions here. The question is just how to sequence it to play around any counterplay that our opponent might have. Unfortunately, if she ends up having Keylon Burst, that will be able to stop one of our expeditions no matter how we sequence it. So I opt for drawing the card first with magical training, boosting our hero expedition, and I draw into Banishing Gate, which looks really nice against the Brassbuck Hive next turn. As it turns out, our Sierra player actually did have the Keylon Burst, so our hero expedition is gone. Now, here I made another play that's maybe a bit questionable. I could have used Off You Go on the Brassbuck to deny our opponent the hero side as well, while still winning the companion side with a boost from Afanas. The only downside is that I'd have to discard something from reserve, and I really didn't like the idea of letting go of potential gas like that, so I decided to instead play the magical training from reserve, which means our opponent will progress on the hero side. So essentially I'm allowing Sierra 1 progression to have more resources, which I thought was a reasonable trade since we're approaching the point where we can close out the game. The card I drew off that is Meditation Training. So in the end we trade expeditions, going into a total score of 5-4 in our favor. Just 2 more steps to go. Our draws for the next round are a 2 fairy and another Off You Go, and seeing the second Off You Go, I made a big decision. I thought to myself, the 2 Sneezer Shrooms plus this 1/1/1 fairy are going to be enough to win both expeditions if I just remove all the Brassbucks with Off You Goes. So I decided to put the Banishing Gate into mana, basically committing to pushing for the win this round and to not remove the Brassbuck Hive at all. I thought my chances were pretty good. Our opponent leads with a Foundry Armor from hand, so that's just a 2/2/2 for 3 so far. I play out 2 fairy, getting rid of that elemental in reserve over there, and our Sierra opponent pulls out another Foundry Armor from hand. It seems like her draws that round were really weak, so at this point I'm feeling pretty confident about pushing for the win here. I get rid of her bug with Off You Go, which also buffs the Sneezer Shroom, signaling that I'll most likely have enough to win both sides. Our opponent is under a lot of pressure to contest at least one side here with their remaining 2 mana, and at this point the Sierra player pulled a little surprise surprise trick that I was not prepared for. Hooked. This card that's been hotly debated actually saves the day here for just 1 mana by putting both of our characters on the hero side. Incredible. I can play out my other Shroom, of course, but even with boost, it will only be a 2/2/2, so there's no win for me anymore. Sierra passes, and I have another interesting choice here to either use Off You Go to tie the companion expedition, or willingly let our opponent progress there to set up for a stronger next turn with meditation training. I thought, since I'm 1 step ahead on the track still, it was fine to let her progress as long as it made me more likely to win in the next round. So I played meditation training. When the dust settles, we trade sides and I go into the next round with 2 strong characters already on the board. So now it'll be extremely hard for our opponent to keep us from closing out the game here. Beauty Sleep and Magical Training are the draws for this potentially final round. And you really love to see the Beauty Sleep here. That card is just such a fantastic finisher and it has great synergies with our deck. So I'm feeling great about this. I could keep all the cards in hand here, but I decide to let the Magical Training go, since then we'll have enough mana to cast all our other cards in hand and in reserve. We're fully prepared to go all out in this round. It's our turn to start, and I was feeling worried about a potential sabotage, so I decided to use the Off You Go from reserve right away, getting rid of that buffed up Brassbug. So now we're presenting 6 power on one side and 3 on the other, and it's looking very bad for our opponent. Keep in mind though that Axiom does have access to Izmir's board wipe, Kraken's Wrath, so it's not 100% decided just yet. Sierra plays out one of the armorers. That puts 5 power into the hero expedition, but it's not enough yet against our 6 there. In response, I tried to play it slow and not reveal any of the tricks in our hand yet, just playing the 2 Fairy from reserve basically as a kind of after you effect. Now our opponent puts the 2nd Foundry armorer there, which does beat our companion expedition 5-4 at the moment. That's a problem I can easily solve though by playing this Off You Go that we saved, which also buffs the 2 Fairy via Afanas' hero power, and at this point I'm pretty sure that this Sierra opponent won't have enough gas to keep contesting that side. And indeed, seeing this board state, she just passed, conceding the round and the game. Overall, a very nice win for this Afanas deck, with a couple of interesting strategic decisions to be made along the way. Game 2. And guys, I won't lie to you, this one was rough. It was rough. We're up against Treyst, who is seen as one of the strongest heroes in Beyond the Gates. It's just crazy how much value this deck can generate. We'll try our best, of course, but I can already tell you it wasn't pretty. Our opening hand looks really nice though. The 2 Fairy is really good against Treyst in general, but I wanted to set up for playing Baba Yaga in round 1 and then Mage-Dancer plus Meditation Training in round 2, so I had to get rid of it here. Probably debatable, honestly. In this game we got lucky because when I played the Baba Yaga, I drew directly into Spycraft, so we get our 2 Fairy replacement right away. Our opponent has the rest of the round for themselves, and yes, obviously, they have the Bastion. Haven, the Bravos Bastion, potentially the most powerful card in the entire game. At least powerful enough that the Exalt League decided to straight up ban it. I thought to myself here, at least we win the first expedition, but nope. They also have an Izmir Stargazer. One of the cards I was very impressed by after the previous season, and with its 1/2/1 stat line, it actually trades with Baba Yaga here. If only we had the rare version. So far this Treyst opponent's start is about as bad for us as it gets. For round 2, we draw into another Meditation and Flamel. I'm getting rid of Flamel here since it's not really the right time for it, and our opponent starts by activating the reserve ability of Lyra Chronicler, which discards it and replaces it with another resupply. By itself that doesn't do much, but it's played in that deck because it puts a counter on Treyst, and he gets a Keylon Burst for it. Now that puts me in a very unpleasant position, since now I can't just play the Mage-Dancer or the Baba Yaga. He seems to be aware of that and keeps 3 mana open, only playing out the Izmir Stargazer. I say only, but honestly, with the boost from Haven, that's a 2/3/2. It's cracked. So I have no other choice but to play the Spycraft first. Not ideal, but it does get rid of the Keylon Burst and resupplies me a Bravos Blade Dancer. That's nice. With just 2 mana left, it's clear that I won't be able to play a character and anchor it. So our opponent probably knows at this point that I'll just throw the Baba Yaga and call it a day. So they put down an Amelia Earhart. That's a 2/2/2. So my Baba Yaga is useless no matter where I place it. The same goes for all the cards in my hand. It really sucks, but I have no choice but to pass and concede the round entirely. So that's 2 progressions for Treyst, and it just feels awful. Next round, Baba Yaga and Magical Training are our draws. I think we've seen enough of Baba Yaga. If we need more cards, we can just draw with Training, so that goes. In my mind, I'm preparing to play one of the Dancers and follow up with Meditation Training and Magical Training, which is technically stronger with the Kadigiran Mage-dancer, but I didn't want to overload my reserve, so I went with the Blade-dancer instead. Treyst just starts out with Amelia. Thanks to Haven, that's another 3/3/3 for just 1 mana. Insane. I was thinking I might draw into Off You Go or something like that, so I played Magical Training next, but we just got another copy of it instead. Our Dancer is a 2/2/2 right now, so they play a Keylon Elemental there and reveal Lyra Chronicler from hand. Now our opponent is below 3 mana, so Keylon Burst isn't an option for them anymore, so I felt safe to anchor our Dancer here. We're tapped out, but our opponent is far from done. First, they activate Lyra Chronicler, which gives them an Axiom Salvager, and it puts their Treyst to 5 counters, so his hero power is active now. Then they use that right away, putting an Armorer into reserve, and then finish us off with the Salvager, which pushes them over the top of our Dancer in the Hero Expedition. So all in all, that's another 2 for nothing for them, and honestly, we're getting completely crushed in this game. One thing we do have going for us, though, is that we're really not running out of resources anytime soon. But still, we're not able to keep up with what Treyst is putting out over there. I put the Flamel into mana again here, trying to focus on cheap spells, and our opponent starts the round off with Foundry Armorer. He was probably scared I'd sabotage that, but now it's on the field, and it's 5 power total, enough to go over our Dancer for now. We would need to cast 2 spells to tie that expedition, and I'm confident we can do that, so I place the Mage-dancer on the companion side, trying to make both sides gain power as I cast my other spells for that round. Even if our opponent decides to use their Hooked here to pull the Mage-dancer over, that wouldn't be the end of the world for us. They use their hero power first, getting Ada Lovelace into reserve from their hand. They could play that, but it seems they preferred the Hooked. Now, in this position, 1 spell is enough for me to win the hero side, so the natural play would be to use Meditation Training from reserve, but something was telling me that even with just 1 mana open, they still might have a cheeky character to win the companion side with, so I really didn't want to lose my ability to play Off You Go if necessary, so I'm forced to use the Meditation Training from hand, since it costs 3 otherwise. Going for this line would probably have looked pretty silly if our opponent had just passed now, but what do you know? They actually did have a Foundry mechanic left. So instead of looking silly, we look pretty clever all of a sudden with this Off You Go. Yes, our reserve is 4 cards, but we managed to actually take a round of Treyst. Winning this round 1-0 felt pretty nice, even if we need to discard 3 cards from reserve for it. I opted to keep the Mage-dancer and one of the Meditation Trainings. We're heading into round 5, and our draws are Flamel and another Blade-dancer. That's the 3rd Flamel. We've drawn the complete playset this game, and it hasn't been great so far. But here I thought it might actually be decent to pull the Meditation Training back to my hand and make it cheaper that way, while putting some decent power on the board. So I decided to keep the Flamel here. I think it's fair to say, what it really comes down to in this round is whether our Treyst opponent has removal for this Blade-dancer or not. If not, I'm liking our chances of staying in this game. We're on the play here, so I run out the Flamel right away. I'm really liking the idea of anchoring this Blade-dancer one more time, but we're so vulnerable to removal then. Treyst resupplies a Chronicler with their hero power and then plays out Ada Lovelace, putting from hand to reserve a Keylon Burst. Yeah, that's probably the game. There's no way we're holding on to our 5/5/5 Dancer here. Also, Ada should have gotten a boost here from Haven. They only noticed that a couple of moves later. So now we know we're saying goodbye to our Dancer, and I'm forced to play another one, but the situation is still awful, since they can just stall for time with a 1 mana play, which they did, and we'll basically have to pass, since we still can't really play Meditation into their Keylon Burst. But just passing is just as awful. They'll get a progression for nothing and essentially win the game. Sadly, I don't think we can really prevent them from progressing, so I was looking for a way to at least trade expeditions, if at all possible. That's why I opted to play Meditation after all, anchoring the Blade-dancer, which will get removed, but in the process growing the newly played Mage-dancer enough to win against the Foundry mechanic at least. And here they made an interesting decision. They opted not to remove the Dancer and instead win the companion side with that Lyra Chronicler. At first glance, it seems pretty silly, since now we'll keep our 5/5/5, but honestly, I like that line more for them. Now they can go all in on winning the companion expedition, where this Dancer doesn't matter anyway, and they still have the Keylon Burst available for it. Very nice decision making there from this Treyst opponent, I'd say. I really like it. My draws are looking spicy. 2 removal spells to go with our dancers, and naturally K-Wrath is especially good when you're not on a play, so after counting mana costs I figured I could keep all 3 of these cards. Our opponent starts off with their hero power, and now we finally see one of the star cards of their deck that we hadn't really seen at all so far, Copelia, which they can put directly into play for free when they drop it to reserve from their hand using Treyst's ability. And since that was only their hero power, as their actual play for the turn, they decide to play a Keelan Elemental and put a second Copelia into play with that card's ability. Did they just draw both of these Copelias or what? Now, lucky for us, these ladies are both asleep for this round. So while it's looking impossible to win this game, we might have chances here to last one more round and get another progression just for honor's sake. Our K-Wrath is looking better and better too, to be fair. I set up for it with our second dancer, and it seems like they're also trying to play it slow by running out the Foundry mechanic and keeping 4 mana open for now, so their Keelan burst is naturally still online. At this point, I'm trying to calculate if there's any way at all for me to tie this companion expedition using K-Wrath and Beauty Sleep. If you want, you should pause the video and try to come up with a solution yourself. It's a pretty complicated position. Welcome back. Now, the Copelias are naturally great targets for K-Wrath since they're already fleeting, but for the other 2 characters, you have to keep in mind that even if I bounce them to reserve, our opponent can just play them out again. In the case of Foundry Mechanic, that just costs them 1 mana, which leaves their Keelan bursts online, and the mechanic comes back even stronger due to Haven being in play. So wrathing the 2 Copelias and the mechanic doesn't work. They just replay the mechanic, and even if we Beauty Sleep one of the 2 characters, they use the Keelan burst on our dancer for the win. So it's clear that if there's any way, it involves the fact that our opponent can cast both Keelan Elemental and Keelan Burst from reserve this turn. If we bounce 1 Copelia plus the 2 away characters, that leaves them with 1 Copelia in play, but that's not immediately a problem, since she's asleep anyway. So now they can only bring Foundry Mechanic back if they still want to cast Keelan Burst afterwards. Which is fine with us, since we can deal with that mechanic with our Beauty Sleep. But what I didn't realize here is that actually they don't need the Keelan Burst at all. Even if we put the Foundry Mechanic to sleep, if they simply play out the Keelan Elemental, it comes into play as a 2/4/4 due to Haven, and those 4 in Ocean are exactly enough to beat our 3/3/3 dancer. It's a disaster. When all's said and done, we do progress on the hero side, but the game's over, and it's a convincing win for our opponent. What a strong showing there from the Treyst deck. You really could see the power of Haven in that game and the synergies going on around Copelia. Looking at a game like this, it's pretty easy to understand how that hero is considered one of the strongest ones. And I guess in that sense we actually did pretty well. Giving them a hard fight up to the very end and scoring 4 progressions against their 7 isn't too bad against Treyst, I'd say. Alright, and since we're having so much fun, here's a 3rd game to round it out. We're playing against Lindiwe this time, the Sacrifice deck. So a bit of Izmir mirror action here. Our hand has all the pieces we want for a great start. Blade Dancer plus Meditation is looking great for round 1. Or even Sneezer Shroom and Magical Training. I was a bit torn with what to go with here. And in the end I went for the Shroom plus Draw, since I thought this Flamel lines up pretty nicely with it for round 2, getting us this Magical Training back for another cheap draw later. Our opponent is on the play, and they just used their first turn for setting up an Ordis Carrier. That's a pretty strong start for them. That 1/1/1 token does a lot of work in a Lindiwe deck, enabling all sorts of sacrifices. So for us, as planned, the round is just Sneezer Shroom followed by Magical Training, and we draw into a Tooth Fairy, which doesn't look too hot here, but it's still an extra card in our hand that we can put into mana if we need to. Round 2, we get another Meditation Training and Banishing Gate. So after putting Tooth Fairy into the mana, we have a decision to make here. Keep playing actively with Flamel on the companion side and using Banishing Gate next round, or use it right now, but do nothing else this round. At first it might look like Flamel is better right now, since Banishing Gate lines up with Magical Training nicely next round, for the 5 mana we'll have then. But that line also implies that we'll have no characters on board next round at all, which I didn't like. So I went with playing Banishing Gate right away, looking to trade expeditions here and have a more active hand next round, in addition to them losing the future recruit. Unfortunately for us though, they had an off you go here. And not just off you go, it's an off you go followed up by a Tooth Fairy to instantly discard that Sneezer Shroom from reserve too, on top of them winning both expeditions this round. Can't be helped. Lindiwe takes 2 progressions. Well, let's forget that ever happened. Round 3. Spycraft and Baba Yaga. I'm not sure Spycraft is worth it against our opponent's reserve here, since Off You Go is 4 mana for them now, so I tossed that and kept the rest. Lindiwe is on the play this time, and they use the chance to sabotage us with their own Spycraft. Luckily we have Baba Yaga as a sort of replacement draw for that magical training we just lost. So I play that and draw into a Katagiran mage-dancer. Our opponent decided to replay Tooth Fairy to try and trade expeditions, and at this point they're more or less tapped out, so I was briefly considering contesting that hero side with a mage-dancer. We both only need Mountain there right now, so their Jellyfish from reserve wouldn't help them. But for some reason I wasn't happy with the mage-dancer and Baba Yaga both going to reserve like that. So in the game I opted to anchor Baba Yaga with the meditation training. That's the second time playing this deck where, looking back on it, I'm noticing I'm a bit hesitant to play mage-dancer, but honestly that card costs only 1 from reserve. So playing it out once without immediately anchoring it is not that big of a deal. So yeah, looking at this game now, I think playing out the dancer would have been better there. Things being as they are though, we trade expeditions. For round 4, our draw is looking like absolute trash, with 2 Kraken's Wraths. We'll see if that one ever becomes relevant in this game. I suppose it's good against the Maw token though, so who knows. I play out the Flamel, returning Meditation Training to hand with 2 mana still open, and our opponent starts out with their Moonlight Jellyfish. That doesn't do much against our Flamel, so I'm assuming they plan to sacrifice that. I just go ahead with the Meditation Training plan, and with all the boosts from Afanas, our Baba Yaga is now bigger than Flamel, so I opt to anchor her. Besides, the Flamel going into reserve could be good for us if we want to cast the Kraken's Wrath for 4 later. So yes, as expected, Lindiwe sacks the Jellyfish to play Gift of Self. That's one of the cards I'm really intrigued by. The rare version draws you 3 cards instead of 2, which is just an insane amount of cards. On the flip side, it doesn't contest the board at all, so here we win a nice double progression, turning the score right around. Off You Go and Sneasershroom are our draws for round 5, you'll love to see it. Honestly, here I had a hard time deciding what to keep, and in the end I got rid of the Off You Go because I thought if the Maw token becomes a target at some point, K-Raf will be better anyway. But I think you could go either way here. Our opponent starts out with an Izmir Stargazer. That's not the version without text that's played in Axiom so heavily, but instead the upgraded Izmir version that has nice synergy with sacrificing. Playing the Sneasershroom here is honestly a bit silly since it's such a good target for that Off You Go, but I thought if they use their whole turn to just play that, I'm fine with it. For now though, Lindiwe summons the Maw token on the companion side and then plays an Anubis, sacrificing the Stargazer, which pumps up Maw to a 4/4/4 total. I also have to sack something, and looking back on it now, I think it would have been a really nice play to sack Sneasershroom, keep Baba Yaga, and then anchor her with Meditation Training, which triggers Afanas to boost her up to 5/4/5. The alternative, which I went for in the game, is to bounce both Maw and Anubis with K-Raf. That wins us a side at the expense of having used K-Raf, but I think that's pretty worth it. We're getting close to the point where we can try to force through one expedition for the win. Seeing Spycraft here as our draw looks perfect against Anubis, and since we have a decent amount of mana now, I decided to keep all 3 of these cards. Luckily we're on the play, so there's nothing our opponent can do to stop this sabotage. Since we drew a second Flamel, I decided to activate the one in reserve to pay only 1 for the Spycraft, and we even get ourselves a Banishing Gate from the resupply. Lindiwe responds with the Off You Go, sending our Shroom to reserve with 4 mana left available. Since we have 6 mana left, Flamel lines up nicely with picking up the Meditation Training from hand to play it right after. But here, our opponent played out an Izmir Stargazer, which made me think that they wanted to trade expeditions, so I changed my plan and instead played out Sneasershroom. Somehow I felt like that gave me a stronger board for the next round to push for the win there, with Flamel going into the reserve to potentially make a spell cheaper while we still keep the Shroom around. Lindiwe made no further plays, so we go to the next round as expected, and we only need 1 more progression to close out this game. So we're heading into hopefully the final round, and with these draws I have to say I would have liked more spells. Now we're forced to decide whether we want to invest 3 mana into Baba Yaga, gambling on drawing a spell. I didn't see much use in the Meditation Training besides giving us 1 boost, since we're trying to close out the game anyway, so I mana'd that and basically hope for the best with Baba Yaga's card draw. Unfortunately for us, Lindiwe is on point here with the Sabotage, so we lose access to this Banishing Gate, which would have come in handy against Kraken or Kuwait or any strong play they might have had. Since I didn't really know what to expect out of them, I just played Flamel out as a character here to present some power on the hero side and force them to show their hand. Our opponent summoned more and then played Gift of Self. I was pretty confused by this, but on second glance it looks like they're digging for an answer to our board, so that's a pretty good sign. I thought if I just put Baba Yaga on the right here, there is no way our opponent is dealing with both sides. They'd have to have a solution to the hero side that costs just 2 mana, and as it turns out, I was right. They played Banishing Gate here, but it's no use. We still win the companion side, and with that, the game. All in all, another nice showing from our deck here. We were able to keep up the pressure, progress, and then close out the game. GG. Alright, here's the full deck list, and there's a couple of interesting points to talk about, but you'll notice that just from Sneezer Shroom, Blade Dancer, and Meditation Training, which I would consider core in this deck, you're already up to using 9 slots of our rare slots. So there really is not much space left after that, and since I wanted to try the full playset of Beauty Sleep instead of just, say, playing 1, I ended up with just 1 more rare slot for the deck. That's why for this version I downgraded the mage-dancer. That's not something that's commonly done, because you'd think, that's my signature card, why am I playing this at common? And you definitely have a point. The rare is a considerable upgrade, but the problem I was having with it is you can't trigger this draw effect from casting just 1 spell. You either need to cast 2 spells, or you need your spell to actually put a boost by itself. Which, to be fair, Helping Hand does for you, so that's the reason why this is another really popular combo for Afanas, but I wasn't playing any Helping Hands in this version, so I thought, I'll try the common mage-dancer for now. Besides, I really wanted to upgrade Magical Training to rare and try that instead. The difference is that it costs less from reserve, which kind of replaces the additional card draw that you might get from your rare mage-dancer, but you're casting more spells this way, that's what I thought. Flamel I also really liked, but maybe just play 2. It's a pretty useless draw early on. So there you go everyone, Afanas Dancers. Overall, I really like this deck. It's fun to play and there's a lot going on. I've been hearing that lots of people are looking to build this in paper, and I can see why. It's a challenging playstyle that feels rewarding if you do it right. A lot of calculation to be done, so definitely try out this deck when you get a chance. Guys, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. My next video will be part 2 of my new card review series, so stay tuned for that, and until then, have a great day. I'm Coach Romain and I'll see you in the next one.